Modern food preservation relies on refrigeration, chemicals, and plastic packaging. Medieval preservation used salt, smoke, and fermentation, creating food that remained edible for years without any external energy. This is the story of how our ancestors stored nutrition across seasons and why their methods produced food that was not just safe, but healthier than what sits in your refrigerator right now. Chapter 1. The refrigerator's hidden cost. Open your refrigerator. Look at the dates stamped on every package. Milk, 7 days. Meat, 3 days. Vegetables, maybe a week if you're lucky. Everything in that cold box is racing toward decay, and the only thing slowing it down is 400 watts of continuous electricity consumption. Your refrigerator runs 24 hours daily, consuming 350 to 400 kilowatt hours annually, accounting for roughly 8% of your home's total energy use. It's the most energy-intensive appliance in your kitchen, and it's not actually preserving food, it's postponing rot. The distinction matters. Preservation transforms food into a stable state where decay is arrested or reversed. Refrigeration merely slows bacterial growth. Turn off the power, and within 24 hours, everything inside begins decomposing. The cold dependency is absolute. In 2021, Texas experienced widespread power failures during a winter storm. Refrigerators went dark. Within 48 hours, households lost hundreds of dollars of food. Grocery stores dumped millions of pounds of inventory: meat, dairy, produce, all ruined. The waste was staggering, and it revealed how fragile our food system has become. Meanwhile, in the cold room of a restaurant in Bologna, Italy, whole prosciutto hams hang from ceiling hooks. They've been there for 18 months. No refrigeration, no preservatives beyond salt. Room temperature averages 15–18 degrees Celsius. The hams will remain perfectly edible for another year, possibly longer. The oldest one in that room has been aging for 36 months and is now considered premium product, selling for €90 per kilogram. Medieval Europeans stored meat this way for centuries, not as luxury food, as survival food. The techniques they developed allowed communities to slaughter animals in autumn and eat their meat through the following summer. No electricity, no cold chain, no plastic wrap. Just salt, time, and understanding of biochemistry they couldn't name, but had mastered through observation. Chapter 2. The Alchemy of Salt. Salt is sodium chloride, NaCl, simple compound, 2 elements. Yet this molecule has preserved more human life throughout history than any medical innovation. Without salt preservation, pre-industrial civilizations couldn't have survived winters or sustained cities. The mechanism is osmotic pressure. Bacterial cells contain water at specific concentrations, maintained by cellular membranes. When you pack meat in salt, the salt draws water out of any bacterial cells on the surface through osmosis. The bacteria dehydrate and die or become dormant. But salt doesn't just kill surface bacteria. It penetrates deep into meat tissue. As salt dissolves in the meat's natural moisture, it creates a hostile environment throughout the flesh. Bacteria cannot grow in high salinity conditions. Most spoilage organisms require water activity above 0.91. Salt-cured meat has water activity around 0.75. The environment is biologically dead. Medieval salt curers understood this empirically. They knew that meat packed with insufficient salt would rot. Meat packed with too much salt would become inedibly hard and bitter. The optimal ratio discovered through generations of trial and error is approximately 3% salt by weight for short-term preservation, 6 to 8% for long-term. Modern food science has confirmed these ratios are nearly perfect. Below 3%, bacterial growth continues slowly. Above 8%, protein denaturation makes texture unpleasant. Medieval curers hit the sweet spot, using nothing but experience and sensory evaluation. But salt alone isn't sufficient for long-term preservation. It needs partners' time, temperature control, and most critically, nitrates. Medieval salt wasn't pure sodium chloride. It contained natural impurities, including sodium nitrate from mineral deposits. These nitrates play a crucial role that ancient people didn't understand but observed. They keep cured meat pink instead of gray. They prevent botulism growth, and they create distinctive, preserved meat flavor. The University of Parma's Food Science Department analyzed medieval Italian salt sources used historically for prosciutto production. They found natural nitrate concentrations of 50 to 200 parts per million, exactly the range modern food safety guidelines recommend for preventing botulism while minimizing nitrate consumption. Medieval curers chose salt sources based on the quality of meat they produced, not knowing they were selecting for optimal nitrate content. The salt knew what to do. They just had to listen. Chapter 3. The smoke that seals. Walk into a traditional smokehouse, and the smell overwhelms, dense, woody, sharp, penetrating. Your eyes water. Your throat catches. The air is thick with particulates. This environment is hostile to human comfort and absolutely devastating to bacteria. Smoke preservation works through multiple mechanisms operating simultaneously. First, dehydration. Smoke carries heat, and heat evaporates surface moisture. Dry surfaces resist bacterial colonization. Second, chemical preservation. Wood smoke contains over 200 compounds, including formaldehyde, phenols, and organic acids, all antimicrobial. These compounds coat the food surface, creating a chemical barrier against decay. Third, antioxidant effects. Phenolic compounds in smoke prevent fat oxidation, the process that makes fat rancid. Smoked meat can be stored for months without developing off flavors that would ruin unsmoked meat in weeks. But medieval smoke curers discovered something more sophisticated. Different woods produce different preservation effects. Oak smoke, high in phenols, gives strong antibacterial properties but harsh flavor. Apple or cherry smoke, lower phenols. Higher esters gives milder preservation but superior taste. Hickory, beech, alder, each wood creates distinct chemical profiles. Traditional smoking recipes specify wood types precisely. German speck uses beech. Italian speck uses juniper. Scottish salmon uses oak. These aren't aesthetic choices, they're applied chemistry optimized for specific preservation requirements. The Food Technology Institute at Hohenheim University in Germany analyzed traditional smoked products from across Europe, identifying the wood species used through chemical fingerprinting of smoke compounds. They found consistent patterns. Fatty fish required heavier smoke, oak, hickory, to prevent fat oxidation. Lean meats could use lighter smoke, fruit woods, since they contained less vulnerable fat. Sausages received mixed wood smoke to create layered preservation phenols for surface protection, organic acids for deep penetration. The smoking schedules were equally sophisticated. Cold smoking at 525 degrees Celsius deposits smoke compounds without cooking the meat. This requires 12 to 48 hours of continuous smoke exposure. Hot smoking at 60-80 degrees Celsius both cooks and preserves, completing in 4 to 8 hours but creating different texture and shorter preservation time. Medieval smokehouses were architectural technologies designed to maintain precise temperature and smoke density. The fire was located below the smoke chamber, connected by a long flue that cooled smoke to desired temperature. Dampers controlled airflow, modulating smoke intensity. No thermometers, no instruments, just empirically derived building proportions that worked. Modern industrial smoking happens in stainless steel chambers with computer-controlled temperature, humidity, and smoke injection. The process is faster, more consistent, and produces inferior results. Traditional cold-smoked salmon lasts 6 to 8 weeks refrigerated. Industrial smoked salmon lasts 10 to 14 days. We've optimized for production speed at the cost of actual preservation. Chapter 4. The microbial allies. Fermentation, the controlled decay that prevents uncontrolled decay. This concept seems paradoxical until you understand microbial competition. Spoilage is bacterial growth. But not all bacteria cause spoilage. Some bacteria produce acids, alcohols, and other compounds that make environments hostile to pathogens, while rendering food not just safe, but nutritionally enhanced. Medieval fermenters didn't know about bacteria. Germ theory wouldn't emerge until the 1860 seconds. But they'd mastered bacterial management through empirical observation across millennia. Consider sauerkraut, shredded cabbage, packed with 2% salt, waited to remain submerged in its own juice. Within days, the cabbage begins bubbling. It smells sour. The transformation seems like spoilage. It's salvation. The salt concentration is high enough to inhibit most bacteria, but not lactobacillus species salt-tolerant bacteria naturally present on cabbage leaves. These lactobacillus begin consuming cabbage sugars, producing lactic acid as waste product. The acid lowers pH from neutral 7 to highly acidic 3.5 to 4. This acidic environment kills or inhibits virtually all pathogenic bacteria. E. coli, Salmonella, Listeria. None can survive in properly fermented sauerkraut. The cabbage becomes microbiologically stable, edible for months without refrigeration. But fermentation does more than preserve, it enhances. The bacterial action breaks down complex compounds into simpler ones, making nutrients more bioavailable. Vitamin C increases during fermentation. B vitamins are synthesized by bacterial metabolism. Digestibility improves as cellulose structures break down. Fermented foods are nutritionally superior to their fresh counterparts. The Max Rubner Institute in Germany conducted nutritional analysis, comparing fresh cabbage to sauerkraut, fermented for 30 days. Vitamin C content increased by 50%. Vitamin K, too crucial for bone health and nearly absent in fresh cabbage, appeared at significant levels. Probiotic bacterial counts reached 8 to 10. 9 colony-forming units per gram, comparable to expensive probiotic supplements. Medieval populations consuming fermented vegetables weren't just preserving food, they were accidentally maintaining gut microbiome health that modern populations eating sterile, refrigerated produce have lost. The rise in digestive disorders, autoimmune conditions, and metabolic dysfunction correlates with the decline of fermented food consumption. We traded living food for dead food and called it food safety. Chapter 5. The fat that protects. In southwest France, a preservation technique called confit transforms duck and goose into food that lasts 6 months without refrigeration. The method is disarmingly simple. Cook meat slowly in its own rendered fat, then store it submerged in that fat. The fat creates an anaerobic seal. No oxygen can reach the meat. Without oxygen, aerobic bacteria cannot grow. The few anaerobic bacteria that might survive are inhibited by the high salt content in the meat and the preservative compounds in the fat itself. Duck fat contains significant levels of oleic acid, a monounsaturated fatty acid with antimicrobial properties. It also remains semi-solid at room temperature, maintaining its seal even in warm conditions. The technique extends to other meats and even vegetables. Pork rillettes, shredded pork cooked in lard, then sealed in the same lard. Chicken liver pâté, cooked liver covered with clarified butter. Mushrooms, garlic, and peppers cooked and submerged in olive oil. Fat preservation works across cultures. Italian olive oil preservation, French confit, Polish smalec, Ukrainian salo, all using the same principle. Fat is both preservative and barrier. The Institut National de la Recherche Agronomique in France studied traditional confit, measuring bacterial loads over 24 weeks of room temperature storage. Properly prepared confit showed no pathogenic bacteria at any time point. Total bacterial counts remained below 10, 3 CFU, gram lower than many refrigerated fresh meats. The researchers tested deliberately contaminated confit, introducing Salmonella and Listeria. Both pathogens died within 48 hours, unable to survive in the salty, oxygen-free, fatty environment. The combination of preservation factors, salt, anaerobicity, and fat chemistry created conditions incompatible with bacterial life. Modern food safety regulations often prohibit room temperature storage of meat, even when preserved by proven traditional methods. The regulations assume that meat not refrigerated will spoil, ignoring millennia of evidence that proper preservation makes refrigeration unnecessary. So traditional comfy producers must refrigerate their products, not because the food requires it, but because regulations demand it. We've codified ignorance into law, making traditional preservation techniques illegal while permitting industrial methods that require constant energy input and create fragile supply chains. Chapter 6. The Honey That Never Dies. In 2015, archaeologists excavating Egyptian tombs found sealed jars of honey buried with pharaohs 3,000 years ago. The honey was crystallized but otherwise perfect. They reconstituted it with gentle heat. It was edible, not technically safe, actually pleasant, with floral notes and complex sweetness. 3,000 years, no refrigeration, no preservatives, just honey being honey. Honey is supersaturated sugar solution, typically 80% sugars, 17% water, 3% proteins, enzymes, minerals. This chemistry creates multiple preservation mechanisms. First, osmotic pressure. The high sugar concentration draws water out of bacterial cells through osmosis, exactly like salt. Bacteria dehydrate and die. Second, low water activity. With only 17% water, honey's water activity is around 0.6. Bacterial growth requires water activity above 0.85. Honey is too dry for microbial life. Third, acidity. Honey pH ranges from 3.5 to 4.5, acidic enough to inhibit most bacteria. Fourth, hydrogen peroxide production. Honey contains glucose oxidase enzyme, which slowly produces hydrogen peroxide, an antimicrobial compound, when honey is diluted. But medieval beekeepers discovered honey's preservation power extends beyond self-preservation. Fruits submerged in honey remain edible for months. Meat coated in honey resists spoilage. Wounds treated with honey heals faster with less infection. Modern medical research has validated all of these observations. The University of Waikato in New Zealand studied medicinal honey for 20 years, documenting its antibacterial properties against antibiotic-resistant bacteria. Honey kills MRSA, VRE, and Pseudomonas bacteria that resist our most powerful antibiotics. The mechanism involves osmotic effect, hydrogen peroxide, and methyl glyoxal, a compound especially concentrated in certain honey types. Medieval healers used honey on battlefield wounds. Modern hospitals are rediscovering honey dressings for diabetic ulcers and surgical sites. The ancient preservation technique is now cutting-edge medicine. For food preservation, honey's utility extends through combination methods. Medieval recipes often combined honey with vinegar, creating sweet-sour preserving liquid for fruits and vegetables. The mixture leverages honey's sugar content and vinegar's acidity, multiple preservation mechanisms working together. Fruits preserved in honey vinegar solution last 18 to 24 months at room temperature, maintaining texture and flavor far better than modern canning methods that require high heat, destroying nutrients and flavor compounds. We abandoned honey preservation because sugar became cheap. Refined white sugar could preserve through osmotic pressure alone, and it cost a fraction of honey's price. But sugar lacks honey's enzyme activity, trace minerals, and antimicrobial compounds. It preserves, but it doesn't enhance. Honey-preserved food has probiotic properties from honey's natural enzymes and beneficial compounds. Sugar-preserved food is just sweet. We traded nutritional enhancement for cost reduction. Chapter 7. The Cellar That Thinks. Medieval castles and monasteries featured elaborate cellars, underground chambers, maintaining year-round temperatures of 10–12 degrees Celsius and humidity around 80–90%. These weren't simple holes in the ground. They were engineered climate control systems using geothermal stability and hygroscopic materials. The principle is straightforward. Ground temperature at 2 to 3 meters depth remains stable year-round, approximating the annual average air temperature. In temperate Europe, this means 10–13 degrees Celsius, regardless of season. A chamber excavated to this depth maintains stable coolness without any energy input. But medieval builders went further. They lined cellars with materials that modulated humidity, sand floors that absorbed excess moisture, limestone walls that regulated through hygroscopic action. They installed ventilation shafts positioned to create convection currents, cool air entering low, warm air exhausting high, creating continuous air circulation without fans or pumps. The University of Bath's Department of Architecture studied surviving medieval cellars across England, instrumenting them with temperature and humidity sensors over 2 years. The data showed remarkable stability. Temperature variation less than 3 degrees Celsius annually. Humidity fluctuating only 10–15%, despite outdoor humidity ranging from 30% to 95%. The cellars were passive climate control systems, self-regulating through thermal mass and material properties. In these cellars, food lasted months or years. Root vegetables, carrots, beets, turnips, potatoes stored in sandboxes remained crisp through winter into spring. Apples, individually wrapped in paper or straw, lasted 6 to 8 months. Hard cheeses, waxed and racked, aged for years. Cured meats hung from rafters, wine and beer in barrels, dried goods in sacks. The cellar was a larder holding a household's annual food supply, buffering against harvest failures and seasonal scarcity. Modern homes have eliminated cellars, replacing them with heated basements that are too warm for effective food storage. We've destroyed the architectural feature that made long-term storage possible, then compensated with refrigeration that achieves inferior results at continuous energy cost. Food stored at 10–12 degrees Celsius in stable humidity lasts longer than refrigerated food at 2 to 4 degrees Celsius with humidity cycling. The warmer, stable environment prevents moisture condensation that accelerates decay. It prevents the cold damage that destroys cell walls in sensitive vegetables. It maintains flavor compounds that volatilize in refrigerator conditions. Medieval cellars provided superior storage environment compared to modern refrigerators, but they required forethought. Cellars must be designed into building foundations. Refrigerators can be added any time. We chose convenience over performance. Chapter 8. The vinegar that conquers time. Vinegar, acetic acid produced by bacterial fermentation of alcohol, is simultaneously a food and a preservative. This dual nature made it invaluable for medieval households. The production is self-perpetuating. Wine or beer exposed to air becomes colonized by Acetobacter bacteria, which consume alcohol and produce acetic acid. Within weeks, the alcoholic beverage becomes vinegar. This vinegar can then preserve other foods through pickling. Acetic acid at 4 to 5% concentration, typical for vinegar, creates pH around 2.5 to 3, acidic enough to inhibit all common food pathogens. Vegetables submerged in vinegar remain preserved indefinitely as long as they stay submerged and the container remains sealed. The method is elegant. Harvest vegetables at peak ripeness. Pack them in jars with spices and salt. Cover with vinegar. Seal. The vegetables remain crisp and edible for 12 to 18 months, often longer. But medieval pickling wasn't just submersion, it was fermentation followed by acidification. The process began with salt brine fermentation, identical to sauerkraut. Vegetables fermented for 1 to 2 weeks, developing lactic acid and probiotic bacteria. Then vinegar was added, raising acidity high enough to prevent further fermentation, locking in the probiotic population while ensuring long-term stability. This two-stage process created pickles that were both preserved and probiotic. Modern industrial pickles skip the fermentation. They're fresh vegetables submerged in vinegar with preservatives. They're preserved but dead, containing no beneficial bacteria. Traditional fermented pickles are alive, containing lactobacillus populations comparable to yogurt. The Max Planck Institute for Molecular Genetics analyzed traditional Polish pickles, cucumbers, fermented in brine. then preserved in vinegar, finding bacterial diversity exceeding any commercial probiotic supplement. Over 20 different lactobacillus species, plus beneficial yeasts and other microorganisms. Each pickle was a microbial ecosystem, and consuming them inoculated the digestive system with beneficial organisms. Medieval populations eating fermented pickles daily maintained gut microbiome diversity that modern populations have lost. The health implications are staggering. Gut bacteria influence everything from digestion to immune function to mental health. We've eliminated them from our food in pursuit of sterility and shelf stability. Traditional pickles also demonstrate preservation synergy. Salt inhibits pathogens while encouraging beneficial bacteria. Fermentation produces acid that further inhibits pathogens. Vinegar addition raises acidity beyond what fermentation alone achieves. Spices, like garlic, mustard seed, and dill add antimicrobial compounds. The combination creates redundant preservation, multiple mechanisms ensuring safety even if one fails. Modern preservation seeks single, effective method refrigeration alone, or chemical preservatives alone. Traditional preservation layered methods, creating anti-fragile systems that tolerated variation and imperfection. Chapter 9. The drying that concentrates life. Remove water, remove decay. Bacterial growth requires moisture, typically 50% water content minimum. Reduce food moisture below 20%, and spoilage becomes nearly impossible. Medieval people dried everything. Meat into jerky, fruit into leathery preserves, vegetables into concentrated nutrient packages, herbs into shelf-stable medicine. The methods varied by climate and food type. In sunny, dry regions, Mediterranean, Middle East solar, drying on racks or rooftops. In humid regions, Northern Europe, smoke drying or indoor racks near hearths. Each method achieved the same goal: remove enough water to achieve stability. But drying does more than preserve, it concentrates. A fresh plum contains 85% water. Dried into a prune, it's 30% water. The nutrients haven't disappeared, they're concentrated into smaller volume. Gram for gram, dried fruit contains 3 to 4 times the calories, minerals, and fiber of fresh fruit. For medieval travelers and soldiers, this was critical. Carrying 10 kilograms of dried food provided the nutrition of 30 to 40 kilograms of fresh food. The weight difference determined whether armies could campaign or populations could survive failed harvests. The Rowett Institute of Nutrition and Health in Scotland compared nutritional content of fresh versus traditionally dried fruits. Their findings challenged modern assumptions. Vitamin C, partially degraded during drying fresh plums, had more vitamin C than prunes. But minerals, iron, potassium, calcium concentrated proportionally with water removal. Fiber increased dramatically on a weight basis, and certain compounds increased during drying. Prunes contained higher antioxidant levels than fresh plums because drying concentrated polyphenols, while also triggering synthesis of new antioxidant compounds through mild oxidative stress. Dried food wasn't nutritionally inferior, it was different. Some nutrients decreased, others increased, but the overall nutrition per kilogram improved substantially. For populations where every kilogram of food required human labor to produce and transport, this efficiency was survival. Modern food distribution assumes cheap transport and refrigeration. We can move fresh strawberries from California to New York efficiently because we've externalized the energy cost to fossil fuels. This system works only while fuel remains cheap and infrastructure remains intact. Medieval food systems assumed expensive transport and no refrigeration. They optimized for weight reduction and stability. Dried food met both requirements. When supply chains fail, not if, when the logistics of feeding cities will return to pre-industrial constraints, dried food will again become strategic resource. Chapter 10. The grain that waits decades. Properly stored grain remains viable for 20 to 30 years. Not edible, viable, meaning it can still sprout and grow into plants. This stability exceeds almost every other food category. The secret is grain's natural design. It's a seed, evolved to survive dormancy until conditions favor germination. Medieval granaries exploited this biology. Grain was dried thoroughly after harvest, spread in sun until moisture content dropped below 12%. At this moisture level, the grain enters dormancy, its metabolic activity nearly stopping. Then it was stored in sealed containers or rooms, protected from moisture, pests, and air. The University of Hohenheim's Agricultural History Department analyzed medieval granary designs across Europe, identifying common features. Elevated floors preventing ground moisture, thick walls providing thermal mass, small windows minimizing air exchange, and in some cases, sealed underground chambers maintaining low oxygen and stable temperature. These features created optimal storage conditions without technology or energy input. They also studied grain from sealed granaries discovered during archaeological excavations. Wheat, found in a German monastery granary sealed in 1549, was tested for viability in 200345 4 years later. Germination rate was 12%, compared to 95% for fresh seed. But 12% is extraordinary for grain, approaching 500 years old. The same grain was tested for edibility baked into bread after milling. The bread was described as slightly musty but acceptable, not delicious, but proof that properly stored grain maintains nutrition across centuries. Modern grain storage uses controlled atmosphere facilities, sealed silos, where oxygen is replaced with nitrogen or carbon dioxide, preventing insect and fungal growth. This works excellently but requires industrial infrastructure. Medieval methods achieved similar results through careful moisture control and pest exclusion, accessible to any farmer with basic materials. The strategic importance of grain storage cannot be overstated. A community with 3 years of grain could survive consecutive harvest failures. Without storage, a single bad harvest meant famine. Medieval societies that mastered storage survived. Those that didn't vanished. The Black Death killed millions, but the survivors included communities that had stored enough grain to endure years of agricultural disruption while plague burned through populations. Food storage was civilization insurance. Chapter 11. The Economics of Preservation. Modern food systems depend on just-in-time logistics. Food moves from production to consumption in days or weeks, minimizing storage needs. This efficiency is celebrated as progress. It's actually fragility masquerading as sophistication. In 2020, COVID-19 disrupted supply chains. Grocery stores reported shortages within 72 hours. Meat processing plant closures created cascading failures. Produce rotted in fields because distribution networks broke. The system's efficiency made it vulnerable. Any disruption propagated immediately because buffers didn't exist. Medieval food systems were slower, less efficient, and vastly more resilient. Every household maintained months of food storage. Villages had communal granaries. Monasteries provisioned for years. The system had massive redundancy. Any component could fail without causing collapse. These preservation systems required labor someone had to salt meat, make sauerkraut, pickle vegetables, dry fruits, monitor cellars. Modern efficiency eliminated this labor through centralized industrial preservation and refrigerated distribution. We traded distributed resilience for centralized efficiency. The trade works brilliantly until it fails catastrophically. Cost analysis reveals the deception. A refrigerator costs $1,500, consumes $50, 70 annually in electricity, requires replacement every 12 to 15 years. Over 30 years, the total cost is approximately $3,600 plus food waste from spoilage. A root cellar costs $2,000, $3,000 to build, requires no ongoing energy, lasts 100 plus years with minimal maintenance, and provides superior storage conditions that reduce food waste. The life cycle cost of traditional preservation is lower than refrigeration, but the costs are structured differently. Refrigeration spreads cost over time through utility bills. Traditional preservation requires upfront investment. Our economic system favors recurring revenue over capital investment, even when the recurring cost is higher. We're economically incentivized toward inferior solutions. Food corporations prefer dependence products requiring continuous refrigeration, create recurring energy consumption, and equipment replacement. Self-sufficient preservation techniques threaten profit models built on dependence, so the industry promotes refrigeration as modern and necessary while characterizing traditional preservation as primitive and risky. The characterization is propaganda. The food safety data shows traditional preservation, properly executed, achieves contamination rates equal or lower than industrial methods. Chapter 12. The Master Who Preserves. In the Dordogne region of France, a woman named Marie Fournier maintains preservation techniques her family has practiced for 11 generations. She's 71, and her hands move with unconscious precision through tasks she's performed thousands of times. She's making duck confit, but calling it making understates what's happening. She's conducting a biological process, orchestrating bacterial death and enzymatic action through salinity, temperature, and time. She explains not to teach, but because I've asked that the salt must be hand-rubbed into meat, not simply sprinkled. The friction and pressure help salt penetrate. The meat must rest 24 hours in salt before cooking. Less time. Preservation is incomplete. More time. Texture becomes unpleasant. The cooking temperature must be low 82 degrees Celsius maximum to render fat without toughening protein. The meat cooks in its fat for 3 to 4 hours until a probe slides through with minimal resistance. Then, it's packed in earthenware crocks, fat poured over until meat is completely covered, and sealed with cloth soaked in brandy. The alcohol provides additional antimicrobial protection. Her cellar contains crocks labeled with dates going back 18 months. She opens one from 14 months ago. The seal breaks with a slight vacuum pop. The fat has slight separation. The meat beneath is firm and pink. She scrapes some onto bread, offers it. The flavor is concentrated, rich, utterly unlike anything refrigeration produces. She mentions, casually, that her grandmother stored confit for 3 years during World War II when German occupation disrupted food supplies. The family ate from those crocks through 1943 to 1945, surviving while surrounding communities starved. The confit that saved her family's life is the same confit she's making today. The techniques haven't changed because they don't need to change. They're already optimal. Marie has no apprentice. Her children moved to Paris for careers. Her grandchildren consider her preservation work quaint, a hobby from another era. When she dies, the knowledge dies. Not the general concepts, those are documented. The tacit knowledge. How the meat should feel when properly salted. What properly rendered fat smells like. How to judge doneness without thermometers. That knowledge exists in her hands, her nose, her accumulated experience. It can't be written down. It must be transmitted through observation and practice. We're watching expertise extinction across thousands of domains. Each traditional practitioner who dies without apprentice takes irreplaceable knowledge. We assume we can reconstruct it from books and videos. We're wrong. The gap between documented knowledge and practice skill is unbridgeable without direct transmission. Chapter 13. The Science That Proves Tradition. For decades, food safety regulations treated traditional preservation with suspicion. Techniques developed through empirical observation were assumed inferior to modern methods based on scientific understanding. Then, scientists actually tested traditional methods rigorously. The results were uncomfortable for regulatory agencies. In 2018, the European Food Safety Authority commissioned comprehensive testing of traditional preservation methods: salting, smoking, fermentation, fat sealing, vinegar pickling, and drying. The research, conducted across 12 universities, analyzed both microbiological safety and nutritional properties. Microbiological safety. Traditional methods, when properly executed, achieved pathogen levels equal or lower than industrial methods. Properly fermented sauerkraut had no detectable pathogens. Properly smoked meat showed bacterial loads below detection limits. Fat-sealed confit contained no viable bacteria after 30 days storage. The methods worked. The key phrase: properly executed. Traditional methods required skill and attention. Industrial methods could be executed by unskilled workers following procedures. But when both were done correctly, traditional methods achieved equal or superior safety. Nutritional properties. Here, traditional methods dominated. Fermented foods contained probiotic bacteria at levels 10 to 100 times higher than commercial probiotic supplements. Smoked foods retained fat-soluble vitamins that modern cooking methods destroy. Dried foods concentrated minerals and fiber. Fat-preserved foods maintained omega-3 fatty acids that degrade under refrigeration. Across nearly every nutritional metric, traditionally preserved foods exceeded industrially preserved equivalents. The report concluded, traditional food preservation methods represent sophisticated applications of microbiology, chemistry, and physics. These techniques produce foods that are safe, nutritious, and stable without continuous energy input. Modern regulations should accommodate traditional methods rather than requiring their replacement with industrial techniques. The European Commission ignored the recommendations. Regulations continued requiring refrigeration for meat, prohibiting raw milk cheese aged less than 60 days, and restricting traditional fermentation practices. Why? Because traditional methods don't fit industrial production models. They're labor-intensive, require skilled practitioners, and produce variable results, artisanal by nature. Regulators and industry prefer standardized, controllable processes, even when the outcomes are inferior. The science says traditional preservation works. The regulations say it doesn't comply. We've created legal frameworks that prohibit superior techniques. Chapter 14. The rediscovery that's starting. Slowly, quietly, people are relearning. Urban homesteaders fermenting vegetables in apartments. Hunters smoking venison in backyard smokehouses. Farmers, market vendors selling traditionally preserved products. YouTube channels teaching salt curing and pickling. The knowledge is resurrecting. The movement is driven by multiple factors: distrust of industrial food systems, desire for self-sufficiency, environmental awareness of refrigeration's energy cost, and simple recognition that traditionally preserved food tastes better. Once you've eaten properly fermented sauerkraut, the pasteurized grocery store version tastes like dead cabbage. Once you've had traditionally smoked salmon, the industrial version tastes like liquid smoke flavoring. The difference is qualitative and obvious. Commercial courses in traditional preservation are proliferating. The University of Gastronomic Sciences in Italy offers programs in traditional food preservation. Individual practitioners, the Marie Fourniers of the world, are finding students eager to learn before the knowledge disappears. The techniques are being documented meticulously, photographed, filmed, archived. But documentation isn't transmission. Reading about fermentation doesn't teach you how kraut should smell at day 5, how the bubbling should sound, how to recognize the moment when fermentation completes. That requires mentorship, practice, accumulated experience. The revival is real, but fragile. It depends on a small community of practitioners, maintaining techniques while gradually expanding knowledge to newcomers. If the transmission chain breaks, if practitioners die faster than apprentices learn, the knowledge could still vanish. The next 20 years are critical. Either traditional preservation becomes mainstream enough to self-sustain, or it becomes extinct, except as historical recreation. The outcome isn't predetermined. It depends on whether enough people recognize that the most advanced food preservation technology isn't industrial refrigeration. It's techniques developed across millennia by people who understood that food security meant independence from fragile systems. Chapter 15. The food that waits for you. Your kitchen could contain food that lasts years. Not freeze-dried survival meals or canned goods with suspicious ingredients. Real food, preserved through salt, smoke, fermentation, fat, vinegar, honey, or drying. Food that your great-grandparents would recognize. Food that doesn't depend on continuous electricity or global supply chains. This isn't survivalist paranoia. It's ordinary prudence. Every household throughout history maintained preserved food stocks until the refrigerator convinced us it was unnecessary. We outsourced food security to an electrical appliance and a distribution system, both vulnerable to disruption. The techniques are accessible. You can ferment vegetables with cabbage, salt, and a jar. You can dry fruits with nothing but sun and screens. You can preserve meat with salt and thyme. The knowledge is available, documented online, taught in workshops, demonstrated in videos. The ingredients are simple: salt, vinegar, thyme. The equipment is minimal: jars, crocks, racks, space. The barrier isn't resources, it's psychological. We've been convinced that food preservation requires industrial facilities, that traditional methods are risky, that dependence is normal. All lies. Medieval peasants preserved food successfully. You can too. The food that never rots is waiting. Not in stores, in techniques. Not in products, in knowledge. The question is whether you'll learn before you need it. Traditional preservation is insurance against fragile systems. It's autonomy from supply chains. It's nutrition that exceeds refrigerated food. It's connection to techniques that sustained humanity for millennia. The refrigerator has served us for 100 years. It will fail personally through power outage or breakdown, systemically through grid failure or social disruption. When it does, the food inside will rot within days. The food preserved traditionally will outlast you.